Disclaimer, this video is a tutorial on my marketplace asset now available on the Epic Games marketplace. For anyone interested, there is a link in the description to find it. What is going on, team? In this tutorial we are going to be talking about the armor sets, how we use armor sets in this system, why I've used this method, and how you can tweak your character to use the sets. It's important to note that because armor sets involve skeletal meshes, 3D modeling will be required in this tutorial. I will instruct you on what needs to be done, however I will not be able to guide you step by step on how to approach everything with your 3D modeling, as this will change based on the armor you are using. So let's get started. The first thing we need to talk about is the method used in this system for the armor sets, as there are actually a few different routes you can go down when it comes to armor. And the different methods are all used because of the big problem that armor sets overlap your character mesh. You can see if we hop into our player character, give our character some armor, then show our mesh, that the mesh overlaps the armor. And this armor was weight painted by a professional, usually you would have even more overlap. So that brings me to the armor set method used for this system, splitting the mesh up into different sections and replacing the character mesh with the armor. This works by setting our primary skeleton to invisible. We keep this as it is still used for collision, animation, and any skeleton references. And then we split our character mesh into different parts and put it together like a Lego. With a bit of planning when creating armor sets, you wouldn't need for a mannequin filler mesh. However, as the mannequin is a robot with lots of broken joints, and because the armor sets weren't designed for a specific mesh, I added in the filler mesh just to fill in the gaps. Now, again, this is just one method you can use to prevent armor overlap. There are other methods out there, one being to use a mask in the material to hide parts of the mesh, but because I'm not a material whiz, and because I think this method does the job just fine, I went down this route. Okay, so that is the method. Now let's quickly talk about how the armor sets animate. So for those of you who don't know, the armor sets are skeletal meshes, and they have to be in order to animate. And although they are just a small part of a body, they need to use the same skeleton as your character. Once you have an armor set using the same skeleton as your character, you can hop into your character blueprint and into the construction script, then use the set master pose component. To put it simply, this node allows you to copy the animation from one mesh to another. So here you can see we have our invisible mesh as our master, then all the armor set skeletons are entered into the target. It's worth mentioning, for this node to work, the skeletons have to be attached as a child of the master skeleton in the components list. Now, because the armor and the character use the same skeleton, the armor will copy any animation that the primary mesh does. Okay, with that all explained, let's go through the steps you need to take to install a new armor set or to tweak the current one for your own character. Now, the amount of steps you need to take will completely depend on what stage you are with your character skeleton. The steps we need to take are as follows. Step 1, we need to change our character skeleton over to the skeleton we will be using for our character meshes and armor pieces. Step 2, we need to split our character into different sections that can be replaced by armor. Step 3, we need to weight paint our armor to our character skeleton. And step 4, we need to import the broken up character and the armor, then change the mesh in the player blueprint and add the new armor meshes into our item database. Okay, so let's walk through these steps. For step 1, changing the character skeleton, I've recently released a tutorial on how you can change your character skeleton. So please check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. If you're happy using the mannequin skeleton as your official character skeleton, feel free to skip this step. For step 2, splitting our character into sections, we will be using a piece of software called Blender. This is a 3D modeling software you can download and use for free. If you have your own 3D modeling software, please feel free to use that, however I won't be going through the steps for it. It's also important to note that I won't be going into detail on how to use Blender in this tutorial. This is something you'll have to research. When you have your software ready, the first thing we need to do is import both our character and armor sets into our 3D modeling software. So for this example, I am going to be using the marketplace asset, the stylized character kit, and I'm going to use the existing armor sets in the flexible combat system. But feel free to use your own. So in my Unreal project, I'm going to right click the stylized mesh, go to Asset Actions and Export and click Confirm. Then I'm going to go to Meshes, Character Related, Warrior Set, and select all my armor pieces by clicking and then shift and clicking, and I'm going to right click and export those. In Blender, I'm going to create a new file, then go into File, Import, FBX, and import the character mesh. Now, same again, let's go to File, Import, FBX, and import the armor set. When the armor set is in, I'm going to move the skeleton along the X-axis using G and then X. So, now is the time where we need to split up our character, and this will completely depend on what your character looks like. But you'll want to split your character into as many sections as you might have overlapping armor pieces. So, have a quick brainstorm. What sections would you like your armor to be split into, and where would you want each point to be cut off at? If we have a look at the warrior armor set, there are clear cuts from the head, chest, gloves, legs, and boots. So those are the sections I'm going to split my character into, using my armor as a reference. For any accessories that lay on the outside of the character mesh, like shoulder pads, necklaces, maybe a belt, we don't need to worry about splitting our character up into these areas because they are on the outside of the mesh. They won't overlap with our character. Now, this part for you will potentially be quite the challenge, depending on how much 3D modeling experience you have. But what we need to do is select our mesh, go into edit mode, and break the character apart by selecting different vertices and making them into a separate object. And if you've just downloaded Blender today, I'd highly recommend getting some practice with the software before diving into it, as this is quite a fiddly software. That, or pay someone to do it for you. But if you're ready, and if you're in Blender, we can select our mesh, press Tab to go into edit mode, press Alt plus Z to go into see-through mode, then we can start selecting vertices. We can select groups of mesh by pressing L, or Shift plus L to deselect groups. We can press C to paint new vertices, and middle mouse to deselect. You can also press Alt plus click to select a line of vertices. So I will begin by selecting different parts of the mesh, and when I am happy I will press P and then click selection to separate that part of the mesh. I will speed this part up, but while I am splitting the mesh up, it's worth mentioning that the armor you're using, pretty obviously, needs to be built around your character. If you take a look at some of the example meshes used in the stylized character set, we can see what the armor or clothes pieces would look like for different outfits. When the armor doesn't cover everything up, you can use body parts of your character to fill in the rest. Now, with the character all split up, the next step is weight painting your armor onto your skeleton. And this is another section that I won't be able to help you much with, as each armor set will be weight painted differently. For this, I'd recommend watching a few weight painting tutorials. However, in my case, I'm going to select the armor piece, then shift click on the human skeleton, press Ctrl P and Object Keep Transform, then Ctrl P again and select with automatic weights. This has just weighted our armor onto our skeleton to the best of its ability. It has not done a good enough job, and you will need to change the weights. You can do this by selecting the skeleton, shift selecting the mesh, pressing Ctrl Tab, then 7 to bring up weight paint mode. Here we can press Ctrl to click between bones, and you can paint more weight on by clicking and dragging, or going up to the top and selecting Subtract to remove weight paint. Again, for this you really need a bit of experience. If it's not your expertise, I'd honestly just pay someone to do it for you. In my case, I'm just going to use automatic weights on the helmet and continue. Now, the very last thing before we move on, all the armor pieces need to have an origin point of 0, 0, 0, aka where the root lies on the character. To do this, we can press Shift plus C to make sure our 3D cursor is set to 0, 0, 0. Then select the object, click Object at the top, Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. This has now made the origin point of that mesh at 0, 0, 0. So make sure all your armor pieces are set to this origin. Now, it's time to export. So select a piece of mesh, either armor or character part, then shift click the skeleton and go to File, Export, and if you're in Blender, copy these export settings. Export every single armor piece and different parts of your character, and I'll see you in Unreal when that's all done. Now, in Unreal, let's select Import, and then let's select all our armor pieces and character body parts. On import settings, and this is important, make sure you select your character skeleton here. As mentioned earlier, both the armor and character need to use the same skeleton. When that's done, we can hop into our BP player character, select all the armor sets and make sure they're visible. And then select the mesh and turn off visibility. Now, for each armor piece, let's swap over our newly broken up character body parts. When that's done, let's go into the content browser, under Blueprints, Components, and into the Equipment component. Then jump into the Delete Equipment Remove Stats function. Now, if we look on the left at our local variables, we need to change over our default character body pieces to our newly imported body pieces. When a piece of armor is unequipped, these are the meshes that will be loaded back onto our character. And the only thing left to do now is to hop into the content browser, go to data tables, and into the item data table. Now we need to create items for the new armor pieces. So I'm going to duplicate the armor plate helmet item, rename the row name to new helmet, and in the equipment info, I'm going to change the skeletal mesh to our new helmet mesh we just imported. Now you'd usually change over all the info, but I'm leaving that up to you. You'd also need to create a new item for all the armor pieces, but I'm also going to leave that up to you. I'm just doing the helmet. So now if we hop into a level, throw a BP pickup item into the level, in the details select the row from the data table, we can now use our new armor piece. So my friends, that is it for me. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Thank you for supporting me and the flexible combat system. I will see you all next time.